Good morning, everybody. I'm Adam Ostro. I'm executive editor at Mashable. Now, if there's one person that you want to have a drink with at cocktail hour later, it's our next speaker. He's the CEO of Chartbeat, and his name is Tony Hale. Tony, his adventures include yacht racing, a trip to the North Pole, negotiating with a vodka-fueled helicopter pilot in Siberia, building a runway in Greenland, and smuggling explosives through Heathrow. But today he's here to talk to you about real-time analytics and his company Chartbeat. So please join me in welcoming Tony Hale to the stage.
Hey there. If they ever ask you to go after the guy with the virginity story, yeah. So yeah, my name's Tony. I run Chartbeat, and we are a real-time analytics service. We work with everyone from the New York Times to Fox News to Al Jazeera. I hope everyone's okay with the English accent. It was a birth defect. And today, I can see most of you have your laptops open. Some housekeeping. In terms of positive comments about this talk, the hashtag is awesome on Twitter. Negative comments about this talk go on Google+. So I don't actually have a deck to show you guys today. We banned PowerPoint about 2 years ago from my company, and it's been awesome. Thank you. But I have this freaking huge screen, so I thought I'd put up some actual real-time data. Who here visits Gorka? Blimey. Yeah, this is what you look like, and you search for some really weird shit. But I'm not really going to talk about that. I want to talk about real-time data and the kind of principles that underlie the successful use of real-time data on the web today. And to do that, I don't really want to start with the web or even computers. I want to talk a little bit about cars, and specifically a Japanese engineer born in 1912 who died before he ever got to see a web page, but nevertheless uncovered the principles for the successful use of real-time data on the web today. So if you think about the traditional use cases of data and analytics, beyond kind of basic reporting, it was to try and create a mental model of the future from historical data that we could try and make predictions against. Does the button on the left work better than the button on the right? If I put the word fresh on my lemonade stand, will it sell more? And this has been incredibly powerful. But as time goes by and as we move from kind of simple projections to ever more complex scenarios, our predictions are affected by more and more variables outside of our own control, and things start to break down. To quote my favorite philosopher, Mike Tyson, everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the face. And the problem as well is that the people analyzing this data, it's us. And when it comes to trying to make predictions about the future, we suck. Two Harvard researchers, Albert and Reifer, did a series of studies where they asked people a question, and they had to state a range of probabilities around that question, which had a 98% chance of accuracy. So Catherine the Great had between 5 and 50 lovers. Facebook's valuation upon IPO will be between $50 and $300 billion. You can make the range as wide as you liked, as long as you felt it had a 98% chance of accuracy. So Albert and Reifer, they expected to get a 2% error rate. Instead, the error rate was between 15 and 30%. Even when we can give the widest possible range of our imagination in terms of analyzing data, we're still wrong up to a third of the time. And the best thing about this study, by the way, the thing that I love, was that they went and did this with Harvard MBAs, and the error rate went up to 45%. And it's funny, it is funny, but it underlies an important point, which is the more we think we know, the more expert we believe ourselves to be, the more likely we are to trust our judgment when we shouldn't and get things wrong. When we try to predict long-term, we suck. The combined US Secretaries of Trade, Interior, State, and Defense were asked to predict the price of oil in 10 years' time. They said it would hold steady or slightly decline. It rose tenfold. When we try to predict short-term, we suck. The single greatest collection of quants in the history of the world were unable to forecast that in a month's time in 2008, the value of their holdings would be zero. Something about this just breaks down. And it was as victim to these problems that a man named Taiichi Ono found himself. He was the assembly manager of a struggling automobile factory in Japan. And building a car is hard. It's 1,000 complex parts coming together. You're having to predict over thousands of variables over which you have little control, whether it's supply chain disruptions, breakages, labor problems, demand fluctuations. And what they found was that they would have constant bottlenecks. They'd have huge towering piles of useless or obsolete inventory. They'd have machinists doggedly making part A when they really should be making part B. Waste was rampant, costs were skyrocketing. And Ono realized that attempting to run a business by predicting the unpredictable was slowly killing them. Now, Ono's colleagues thought this was normal. This is just how all factories run. Maybe if we just slice the data a little bit more finely, if we just dove a little deeper, then we could make it work. Ono didn't agree. He thought we were never going to get better at complex predictions because at its root, the problem is an intractable one. Instead, he wanted to try and find a way to make the problem of an uncertain future not matter, to minimize the amount of forecasting we need to do to run our businesses. And he thought he had the answer to that in real-time data. He saw a factory like a human body, constantly adapting and responsive to the environment and stimuli of the moment. That was Ono's vision. Now he just had to make it work. And this is where it got tricky, because Ono worked in heavy manufacturing. And he realized that for real-time data to work, you have to be able to respond in real time. This is important. Real-time data isn't worth a damn unless you can respond in real time to that data. And his industry was not known for its speed of adaptive grace. As his foreman patiently explained to him, in factories there are two kinds of time. There is productive time when we're building stuff, and there is unproductive time when we're retooling machines to build other stuff. That retooling, on average, takes 3 days. So thank you very much for your grand plan, Mr. Ono, but your plan would have us constantly retooling and never building. Far better to just predict how much of part A we need to build all of that, switch, retool for 3 days, and make all of part B. But Ono didn't buy that. He simply said, kutabare, which roughly translates from the Japanese to mean, fuck it. And he went in and he hacked the factory. His team tore up the old way of doing things. They changed workflows, job responsibilities, skill sets. They had workers hacking on their own machines until they got that retooling time down from 3 days to less than 10 minutes. Now, he had a factory able to respond in real time. Now, he could use real-time data. And so he did. And it was a disaster. Because the data was still in the hands of his back office teams. It was in the hands of his analysts, whose job it was to collate, cogitate, and disseminate reports. And now they were having to try and deal with the front line, And back and forth, back and forth. It wasn't working. They couldn't keep up with the cadence of production. Ono had the real-time data. He had a factory able to respond. But now communication was the bottleneck between those two. And so he realized that what he had to do is put data directly in the hands of his frontline workers. He had to democratize decision-making down to the front lines and give them the authority and ability to act. Now, this was huge in Japan, especially the hierarchical nature of Japanese corporations. Because he was no longer relying on workers to follow orders. He was trusting them to make decisions. By the time he was done, any worker on the production line could stop it anytime they wanted to, if they thought it was necessary. And when he realized what he realized about the frontline teams was that they were kind of different to the traditional consumers of data within his organization. They didn't have MBAs. They weren't analysts. They were frontline guys with grease on their hands. He couldn't just give them data in the same way. And they had a different purpose for it too. It was no good giving them a pile of spreadsheets and say, could you please segment this? Instead, he had to think about the way that data was communicated. He had to change it. And he made it highly visual, sometimes as simple as an empty box or a flashing light. It became an environment of data, not a report. And in doing so, he transformed his company. He became a legend, and his company, Toyota, went from near bankruptcy to being the most consistently profitable automobile company in the world. Now, today you can see Ono's lessons alive in companies all around the world. If you look at fashion, there's usually a 6-month lead time between concept and in the stores. 6 months. That means you're having to predict what the most unpredictable people in the world want to wear 6 months from now. Zara, Spanish clothing chain, does things differently. They hacked the factory, and they went from concept to in the stores in 15 days. They don't have to try to predict what's going to be fashionable in the future. They just get to see and then make that. US Marine Corps, themselves no stranger to the idea that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. They've embraced Ono too. They set out their commander's intent, the broad set of outcomes they want to achieve, and then they delegate authority down the chain of command to the people most able to react in real time. They democratize decision-making down to the unit level, those best able to adapt to the exigencies of the battlefield. And even Steve Jobs, RIP, 1984, launching the Macintosh, trying to reach a brand new audience for computing. Didn't just give them a mini mainframe with a blinking command line. He introduced the graphical user interface, changed the audience, changed the way that data is communicated. And you see these same principles alive in everything we do on the web today when it comes to real-time data. You take online advertising. The traditional way, the traditional flow of advertising, the ad ops guy goes, looking at last month and maybe the same data from last year, I reckon we're going to do 2.2 million page views this month. Ad sales takes that number, slides some kind of demographic surveys on there, makes a prediction on top of the prediction about who's going to visit the site, and then they go out and sell that. And often they're wrong. Spikes happen. Someone goes and kills Osama bin Laden. Or that special on hemorrhoids that was really going to jack up the health section just doesn't quite take, which for ad ops can be a real pain in the ass. Because then you have to find a way to fix it. You have to arbitrage through search. You have to maybe buy ads on other sites. or cheat. God forbid that anyone in advertising would cheat, but maybe do run-of-sight ads instead of in the vertical. And these are all solutions that are expensive in dollars and ethics. So what happened when real-time data met advertising? It didn't make that process faster. You didn't have ad sales guys waving their hands like traders trying to sell fast. You didn't have ad ops making faster, complex predictions. Instead, it replaced complex predictions with simple, tactical responses in the now. Guy comes to the site. Site says, hey, I've got someone here who likes bowling and BMWs. Who wants him? Real-time bidding platform says, I want that guy. Bids for him, shows him an ad. For all the technological complexity, at heart, it's moving from complex predictions about a group of people to a simple tactical response to a single individual. And we see this if we go even further into publishing, if we go to editorial. The old way of editorial was very much fire and forget. In the morning, we try and work out what the hell we should be writing about. What do we think was going to have impact with the people coming to our site? What was going to drive them to our site? Then we'd write that content and hope like hell that it worked. If we wanted to change something, we couldn't. Our CMSs were slow, painful to use. Much, much better just to kind of hit and hope. Data, largely in the hands of back office analysts, occasionally sending maybe daily, weekly, monthly reports that were already obsolete. Yes, Steve Jobs died. Thank you. We know that. Unfortunate. Doesn't necessarily have much of an effect on the next month. And then when you got that data, when some well-meaning managers decided to give that data to the frontline teams, often they gave it in the same format as the data being used by their back office guys. So you had editors wading through Omniture, trying desperately to make sense of segmentations and different parameters. And generally what happened was you got lip service or it was ignored. And into this world came a new breed of publishers who believed that they could use real-time data to disrupt their industry. People like Paul Berry at the Huffington Post, Nick Denton at Gawker. First thing they did was they eschewed the old professional enterprise content management systems in favor of custom builds or built on top of blogging platforms. For them, speed was more important than polish. They needed to put their people in a position to respond. And they did. Next, they took the data that they had and they gave it to everyone. Every single editor had direct responsibility for the site now, direct access to what was happening. They were connected in a way that had never happened before. And when they were representing that data, they were doing so in a way that their frontline people implicitly understood. They didn't just give them the same tools as before. When you go to the Huffington Post, that data is overlaid over their site. They intuitively understand what they want to do. If you go to Fast Company or Gawker, you see dashboards almost exactly like this, flashing, pulsing with data the entire time, telling them what's going on and what should you be doing right now. It's not just the Huffington Post and Gawker and the early Vanguard anymore. You're now seeing almost every publisher changing and adapting when they realize they have to. They have to adapt or they're going to die. So almost every publisher is using real-time data in this way now, to different standards of ability. But it's early. And so when you're thinking about real-time data in your own business, think about Ono's principles. It's not about accelerating business as usual. It's about replacing complex predictions of the future with simple, tactical responses in the now. Look for those places where you're having to predict, and how can you break them apart? And if you're doing that, you've got to know that it can't work until you put your business in a position to respond in real time. You've got to hack the factory. And people tell me, they say, well, that's all very well for these businesses. They're different to mine. Mine has different challenges and we can't react in real time. I tell them, Ono did this with heavy industry. Don't tell me we can't do this on the web. And if you want to act in real time, you've got to put the data directly in the hands of those most able to affect change. It's your frontline teams. By all means, set out your commander's intent, the outcome you wish to achieve. But then give your frontline teams the authority and the ability to act in real time. If we've learned nothing else from social media, we've learned that. Southwest, United, etc. And if you're giving your frontline teams real-time data, you've got to communicate that data in a way that they will implicitly understand. It's not about a report you generate. It's about an environment you live in. That's the key to presenting data to the frontline teams. So if you can do all that, if you can change the purpose of data from reporting to response, the audience of data from back office analysts to frontline actors, and if you can change the way you communicate data so that the broader range of your people will understand it, then you can build a business as adaptive and responsive as the human body itself. Thank you very much.